and in this chapter I'm going to run over some scene organization tips. Now, I may have hit on many of these points during this DVD, and I'm not actually repeating myself here. What I'm trying to do is reinforce how important some of these things are, so bear with me here. The first thing is that it's really important that you actually name your objects, and in this case we've got our object called GeoFrame01, and that lets us know that it's a geometric object. It's called frame, and it's the only one of it basically in this case, so the number doesn't really matter so much. But when you have 20 objects with a similar name, then you need to number them. Now, a typical naming convention that I would suggest is that you use something along the format of a prefix, some kind of logical prefix that actually defines what that geometry is. As an example, I tend to use 3-letter prefixes, things like geo. LGT would mean lights, SPL could mean splines, HLP would mean that it was a helper. And then you combine that prefix with a name. I usually put an underscore in between, and then some kind of descriptor, in other words, a description of what that thing is. So if it was, let's say, geo underscore table underscore leg, or underscore top, or underscore caster, or something like that. And then usually you finish off with either another kind of descriptor, or maybe a sub descriptor of some kind. Like, for instance, you could say geo man underscore arm underscore L for left, or underscore R for right. And then if there were a number of those things, you could have another underscore with a number. So if you follow some kind of system like this, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as the one that I've just described, then at least you'll have a nice organized list of objects in your scene, and it'll be much easier to actually pick things out. So, if you had some lights in a hallway, you might have LGT underscore hallway underscore 01, or LGD underscore stair spot underscore 1. Or in the case of our go-kart, we might have geo underscore axle, geo underscore tire underscore LF, say for left front, and things like that. I think you can get the idea of what I'm talking about here. Be organized and make sure that when you've created a number of objects, you go into them and either manually change the name one by one, or use the naming tool that I showed you earlier on. When you do have your objects named in this way, it's actually much easier to go in and select them using the select objects by name dialog. And you can also use the selection floater dialog, which is the same thing as this option here, except it stays on screen. And if you've got multiple monitors, for instance I have 2, then you can just put this onto your second monitor and have it open at all times. If your objects are named in a clear, coherent manner, then it makes it much easier to select them. And in the last couple of chapters, we hit on using layers. Layers were introduced in 3ds Max quite late on, really, but it's a pretty decent system, and it allows you to do lots of different optimizations. You can create layers, hide layers, just by hitting on the visibility icons here. You can hide all layers by clicking here. You can freeze individual layers, or you can freeze all of them and toggle them by hitting this button here. And then if you set the display properties of an object, you can also override the display properties of things also. So you can go in here and you can say frame layer properties wireframe, and then say OK, and then it'll display as a wireframe. Whereas other objects in the scene, if I create a teapot, you can see it'll stay as shaded. So you can actually have mixed display types by using layers. And obviously for that to work, you need to go into the object's properties, and you need to have display properties controlled by layers. Otherwise, the display system for each object is actually controlled within its own properties, like here. You can actually set up how it's going to be displayed here. It's a very easy system to use. If you want to create a new layer, then you can just basically select the objects that you want to be in it, and click here and it'll create a new layer. You can also have nothing selected and create a new layer, and obviously it'll be empty. When you have objects inside a layer, you have this plus icon next to it, and you can open that up and have a look at what's in there. You can select all of the objects in a layer just by right-clicking on it and clicking on select. If you wanted to put an object into a layer, you just select the object, make sure you have the layer selected, and press plus, and that puts the object into the layer. So you can see now actually I can select that teapot just by selecting its layer. Once it's in the layer, you can hide it, freeze it, and if you wanted to move that teapot to another layer, you would just right click here, select it, or you could select it manually. And once you have it selected, you could choose the layer that you want to put it in, press the plus button, and that adds the selected objects to the highlighted layer. And now that teapot is in this layer here. When a layer is empty, you can delete it apart from when it's actually set up to be the default layer. And the default layer is the layer in which objects which have freshly been created are put into. So for instance, if I have this selected and I create a plane and a box, you'll see that if we turn off the display, you can see that by default they've been put into this layer here because it's the currently default layer. So we'll just make this one active here instead. We'll just select these objects and we'll put them into this layer. And now that this layer is empty and it isn't actually the currently active layer, then we can actually delete it by clicking on this icon here. Very simple system, works very well, and I'd highly recommend it when you're working on a model, because if you have a guide piece of geometry as we had here, then it makes a lot of sense that you actually have it displayed in a different way, maybe wireframe, and also you can freeze that, and in that way you can actually make that object visible but unselectable, and therefore you can use it as a guide object to model to. And one last system we'll be looking at is the name selection set system, and this was in Max way before the layer system, and actually comes over from 3D Studio. And what it allows you to do is basically create on-the-fly ad hoc sets or layers, if you can imagine them to be. So if we create a teapot, let's say, create a few teapots, and then let's say we create a few boxes. Let's say I quickly wanted to be able to select either the teapots or the boxes. Well, the easiest way to do that is to select all the boxes. We'll just turn on wireframe so we can see if we've actually got them selected or not. And then you can go up here and you can say type in cubes. This is the name selection set window. When you press enter, that becomes a name selection set. I'm going to do the same thing here for the teapots. I'm going to call these obviously teapots. Those are my two name selection sets. And now if I want to select all the cubes, I can just go up to here, click on cubes, teapots, teapots. So it's now useful as a sort of complement to the layer system, because you can basically create these selection sets, and they can be outside of the normal layer system. They don't have to be anything to do with the sort of organization you have going on inside your layer system. So you've got another kind of option there for having sort of on-the-fly sets of objects. And the other cool thing about name selection sets is that they actually work on a sub-object level as well. So let me just show you that. If we get this teapot and we convert it to an editable mesh, let's say we select some vertices, I can say verts right, and let's say I go to here and I select the spout, I can say spout, I can select the lid and I can say lid, and I can go to the verts and I can say select these and say handle verts. And now if we look in the name selection sets while I'm in vertex mode, you can see we have handle verts and verts right. And if we go into elements, you can see that we have lid and spout, and you can see that we've stored these different selection sets. Now these sets are specific to the type of sub-object that we're working with. So in this case we've got a set of sets for the elements. You can see we can't see the vertex sets, and if we go to vertices, we can't see the element sets. We can't see lid and spout. And if we come outside of the object, you can see that we have only cubes and teapots visible to us. So every object in the scene can have its own set of selection sets which are specific to the sub-objects in them. So it's a very, very flexible system, and a really great way of being able to save out your selections and pick them out later for further use. So have a good experiment there with the name selection sets. So that wraps up our look at organization techniques. Let's move on now into the next chapter where we'll wrap up this DVD.